So, Man and Superman by George Bernard Shaw. This is a play that context will help. There's a bunch of notions and ideas and references in the play that the whole thing becomes a whole lot more fun and a whole lot more readable if you know that stuff. So this is one where the background lecture is really a good idea, and I hope you guys do listen. Um, this play is by George Bernard Shaw, who wrote in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. He wrote until he was in his 90s, I think, and he died in 1933. He was born in Ireland. He ended up moving to England and making his career in London. He was very much a self-made man. His family was not wealthy, and he sort of trained to be a clerk in an office and things like that. But he basically, through wit and intelligence and various linguistic gifts, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He ended up being a big deal. Okay. He started out actually as a drama critic, a drama and a music critic. He would criticize things like, classical music and plays for the London stage. So he wrote for the newspapers as a critic. And that will be relevant to the setup of this play. And then at a certain point he started writing plays, and they caught on, and he wrote prodigiously for the rest of his life. This particular play, he said, according to the preface, which is in your book and you can read it if you want. I love Shaw's prefaces, but I didn't assign it to you because the play is already pretty long. He writes the preface to this play as a letter to Arthur Bingham Walkley, who was kind of a frenemy of his, another drama critic in London. So they were cordial, but there was a rivalry, so forth. And what he says in the intro is that Walkley once asked him why he'd never written a Don Juan play. Now, I'm not sure that all of you know who Don Juan was. He's a legendary Spanish nobleman of the 17th century, I think it was, who is supposed to have been one of the great womanizers of all time, a seducer of women. Probably, and if you've heard the term Don Juan, that's where it comes from. Probably the two most famous amorous conquistadors in Western culture are Don Juan and Casanova. And Don Juan's earlier, and he's from Spain. Anyway, so Arthur Bingham Walkley asked Shaw why he didn't write a play about Don Juan. And that was an interesting sort of challenge for Shaw, because Shaw, for instance, once was quoted as saying that sex was infinitely less interesting than mathematics. And he was known for years as someone who sort of poo-pooed the whole idea of romantic comedy and things like that. Now, it's a little more complicated than that. He made that joke, and Shaw knew how to play a public role to create a persona for himself. It was good business, and he was good at it. But it's true that he's not he's not a romance novel kind of writer, okay? So he had to make this topic interesting to himself. He had to do some things with it. And one of the things he did with it was stand the premise on its head. The idea of Don Juan is the man who pursues and seduces women, that he is the hunter and she is the prey. Shaw thought he'd turn that on its head. He wanted to write a play in which the woman was the hunter and the man was the prey. For one thing, he thought it was more realistic. Well, you'll see as it gets discussed in the play why. But he thought things like love and marriage, and especially marriage, are not really in men's hands, though they like to pretend they are. They're really in women's hands, because women have this biological imperative to find the right father for their children. Men want to have a good time, but women are finding the right father for their children. And that is so much more serious and potent a motive that he thinks, this stuff is really going to be run by women. This area of human life is going to be run by women, not by men, even if the man thinks he's the instigator. Okay, so he decided to write a Don Juan play in which Don Juan was pursued and not pursuing. That's one thing. The other thing is that this play falls into the genre of a romantic comedy, and of the kind that you might have found a lot on the English stage when Shaw was reviewing plays, and which we do a version of a lot now too. It's basically well-to-do, attractive people trying to find their way past obstacles and end up with the right person. You've seen a million movies like that. And Shaw had seen a million plays like that. This was sort of before movies, but he'd certainly seen that on the stage often enough. And so you get those conventions, but then you'll also notice that it feels like there's something else too. There's some other layer. I mean, for instance, what does that title mean, Man and Superman? What's all that about? Why you'll notice that especially the character Jack goes off on these sort of philosophical tirades. And then when we get to the second half, what you'll read for week 2, and I'll kind of discuss that in its own file, then you get something really wild. And you get a whole lot of, I think Shaw's subtitle for this play was A Comedy and a Philosophy. Because he had a whole philosophical thing that he wanted to explore and to bring before the public. And if that sounds daunting to you, I understand that. But I think Shaw had a unique gift for making that sort of thing fun. You'll see what you think. Okay, so I'm going to stop this right now and I'm going to go into this whole philosophy thing because that's what you really need help with.